in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy, and it is a delightful morning where I live because we're in the middle of a heat wave, and I'm able to find the last remnants of warmth before everything becomes a freezer in this country, which is going to probably start after this heat wave goes away. But regardless of that, today we have a crap boatload of stuff to talk about, obviously. Well, we usually do, but even more so after the week of hell the Americans just went through, and all the people are celebrating, and some people aren't, and the people that aren't are celebrating for a lot of different, or not celebrating for a lot of different reasons, and it's kind of interesting to take that and crunch it and figure out what's going on. So we're going to try to do that a little bit today. But before we do, I would like to introduce my talented and quite a bit warmer than I am co-host.
Good morning, Andy. Yeah, it's a chilly 52 degrees here, so it's going to warm up a little bit today. But we actually had rain over the weekend, and it was amazing. Loved it. And rain in a desert is an entirely different experience. So it cooled off quite a bit.
Kind of like heat in Canada, right? It's completely out of the normal.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that things are good for you. But isn't 52 degrees in New Mexico? Isn't that sweater weather?
Yeah, I am actually wearing this lovely handmade shawl. A friend of mine made. She is a wonderful artist with fiber. So I've been wearing this all around Albuquerque and getting so many compliments on it. So if you want one, she takes commissions. Drop your email in the chat and I'll send it off to her. But she does amazing custom work, and it's come in so handy here because we start off really chilly and then it gets warm during the day. So this is perfect. I don't have to haul around a coat. I just have a couple of these.
When you drive around Albuquerque, on display, do you wave like this?
I do. I gave away my tiara, but other than that, just yes.
Okay, we're kind of diverted from our purpose here today. I don't want us to be compared to The View. Okay, so.
That's exactly right. We do have a lot to talk about this morning because we all went through, and this wasn't just the United States, this was the rest of the world looking at it, the American population. Are we still losing our minds? And the fact that this election was so close terrified our global neighbors. So I was getting messages from some of my friends who live overseas like, what the hell? So yeah, and just having to explain to them that, well, we have a terrible candidate who is the lesser evil, and there is a major party who's
for some people.
Okay, for some people. For some other people are willing to forgive and forget, like what happened yesterday. So this particular candidate is run by an organization that makes millions of dollars whether he wins or he loses. So they really didn't give a shit about what was going on, and that's why the election was so close. We did not put our best forward, and that's an inarguable truth. I mean, you can try and argue that, but you're going to look ridiculous because the numbers speak for themselves. And it wasn't just, I think there are many things, and we're working on doing a postmortem on this election and what went wrong and what happened with progressives across the spectrum, how campaigns were working. And then I myself had an invitation to join a panel discussion tomorrow on corruption. So that's kind of a broad topic and so many ways to talk about it. So all of these discussions are going forward. But the reason we wanted to do this broadcast this morning was because already, we haven't even had the honeymoon period. Already, as of Saturday and Sunday, even before they called the election for Joe Biden, you saw the neoliberal, Biden bots or whatever we're calling them, already coming out hard against progressives and centrist policy. They want to go to the right. And they were out there with their messaging about fall in line and how dare you and shut up, sit down, all of that sort of thing. And my favorite is now is not the time. I love that phrase because they always trot that out when it is exactly the time to have that conversation. Because we don't want a competent version of Trump to come back. And that is exactly what's going to happen, right? So there were a number of journalists who talked about this over the weekend, that all of these people, the white supremacists, the xenophobes, all of these people who were true believers in what Trump was doing, whether their goal was to bring about the apocalypse or just a general death cult, they didn't go away. They are regrouping right now. And so we have a very narrow window where we can diffuse the situation or wonder what happened while we're standing in rubble and fire. And yeah, so.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's too simple to look at this and be happy about the result, because the undercurrent of why this all occurred still exists. We don't have made any change, right? You can consider Trump a vile human being, and I think most people do, right? Whether that's a deal breaker or not and that determined how you were going to vote, right? But in terms of, is the country better off, right? Is in terms of real ways of looking at it, is the country better off than 2015? And the answer really is no, right? With other added things like the pandemic and the worsening of the climate crisis, right? So how do we move forward from this? That's what we want to discuss today, right?
Right, exactly. So, social media was a buzz, depending on who you follow and all of these things. But one of the memes that came out that I thought was hilarious. Andy, you want to put up the orange, the yellow suit guy? Because this particular meme has been used in many different ways, and this one actually had me laughing out loud because, yeah, this is exactly what's going to happen. And buckle up, Buttercup. This is where we're going, right? And I was talking to all of my friends who are more of the Biden supporters, and asking them gently, I'm like, you have not put away your marching shoes yet, have you? Because we have work to do. And one of the graphics from TikTok that really took off on a viral status was a woman was videotaping her elderly mom, crying while they were announcing Biden's win. And she's like, well, Mom, why are you crying? And she's like, well, I get to keep my Social Security and Medicare. And everybody was looking at that as a beautiful thing, right? And my heart just sank. I was like, oh, she doesn't know. She does not know that Biden on many, many occasions has always offered up Social Security and Medicare as a negotiation point for austerity, to make cuts to those programs to appease his colleagues on the Republican Party. And this is part of why you cannot put away your marching shoes yet. Because while we did choose the lesser evil, we still have a hell of a lot of evil to fight right now. So
and then one of the main videos that was shared, especially this morning on Twitter, right, that's making the rounds now, is an interview with Mitt Romney about, it doesn't matter who I voted for. That's in the rearview mirror now. We've got to make sure that the Republicans stay, on message, right, about there will be no Green New Deal, there will be no Medicare for all, we're not getting rid of gas, oil, and coal, right? Those are all key talking points for the Republican Party. Well, people don't realize that Mitt Romney is a very close friend of Joe Biden, right? And there's a serious belief that he is being pushed as a cabinet position in Biden's thing. Hello.
Well, yeah, actually, the rumor that came out was Romney is being picked for Health and Human Services. So for those of you who don't understand about Medicare for All, on our website, we've got tons of content. We'll do another big spiel about it because now is the time to sell it when Fox News viewers are in favor of it. But here is the common misconception. Health and Human Services does not monitor, they don't, it's not government takeover of healthcare. They don't do that with Medicare today. What they do is monitor the reimbursement rates for doctors and hospitals. So they release that database of, if you need an MRI in New Mexico, it's going to be far cheaper than it would be in Chicago or LA. They monitor that and take the data and do the analysis. That's it. That's all they do. Every claim, every process that runs out of Medicare today is run by a company, a private for-profit company out of Virginia called Leidos. Okay, so it's private. And they manage all of the claims and reimbursement processing and things like that. So this particular company since 2015 has been ramping up because even the CEO on their SEC filings in 2015 told their investors, we're making sweeping purchases and mergers because we know that universal health care is coming and we want to be able to support the entire country. So they have been on hold, this private company, ready to go since 2015. So what would happen under a Medicare for All is, number one, we would add in benefits and drop the age from 65, 64 and a half, 65, down to 0.
Right.
That's it. That's it. And then, of course, if you're a doctor or a hospital, you get special incentive payments to help with the transition and all of that sort of thing, because we don't want doctors and hospitals to go out of business, and we don't want more consolidation. So all the doctors, all the hospitals, still private. Everything that is run from the company that does the processing, still private. All of it's still private. All HHS does is monitor and keep the data analysis. And if you look at their own quarterly reports, they say that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the way that it is saving money is by cutting reimbursement rates to doctors and hospitals. That's not what we intended, right? We want to support more doctors, more nurses, more hospitals, more clinics. How do they stay in business if we're cutting that while we're trying to expand the Affordable Care Act? That's crazy.
It absolutely is. And the main point of all of that is, and you can look at the system in my country, right, where for an example of that, and not just here, pretty much anywhere else in the world, and how healthcare is funded. Right? You cannot have a for-profit portion of healthcare and cover everybody equally. That's just the way it is. You can't do it, right? Healthcare should be a right for all people. And when you look at the system, the way it works, right? For example, if I want to go see my doctor, who I chose, right? I didn't have to negotiate with anybody or talk to anybody. I simply found a doctor, started going there. I will call my doctor, go visit my doctor, get the health care I need, and go home. That's the entire way that our health care works. There's no middleman. There's no health insurance industry. The government has absolutely no say in any of that. And that's the way most free healthcare systems in the world work, right? You have to be careful of the way of the neoliberal messaging of how they say that system doesn't work, because it's simply not true.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we will get into more of a discussion about how Medicare for All actually works, and particularly the pushback that I think really works with our conservative Democrats is if you're going to use GDP as a measure, then the underlying component that creates the growth that you are measuring by is the health and welfare of the worker. If you're not protecting that, if you're leaving people on their own, if you're pushing people out and literally asking them to die quietly, then you're going to have a problem with GDP, and that's going to affect profitability of businesses all across the board, as well as the wealth and value of your currency. Pretty simple stuff, right? So we will get into that more, but some more on the what's shaping up from the Biden administration, particularly from the transition team, and who's coming out, these names that are bubbling up, who may be potential cabinet members. And right now is the time for us to speak up and say, yeah, no, not a good choice. Because right now, this transition team, they're kind of in an ivory tower, quite literally. And they're not really paying attention to anybody other than the donors. So Politico kind of leaked out this information, and why I would pay attention to Politico is they have become literally the PR arm for the DNC, and all pretense is done. They're not really independent journalists anymore. They're really the vocal arm of the DNC. So they put out an article floating some of these names that I thought was pretty telling. So if you look at this particular graphic here, some of the names that are on it are just unbelievable. So you've got Susan Rice, Doug Jones, Michelle Grisham, Eric Garcetti, Meg Whitman, Ernest Moniz, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that, Tom Udall, Heidi Heitkamp, and Pete Buttigieg. What the hell? So of that list, I don't see a Democrat on that list, right? So what I see is a bunch of Republicans in blue jumpsuits.
Right.
And, some of their policies and some of their rhetoric in the past has not been pro-worker, has not been pro-local economy, Main Street. These are people, you remember Pete with his wine caves. And my personal issue with Pete, and I know people love Pete because of his LGBT background and things like that, but I don't care about that when it comes to policy.
We don't play identity politics here.
Yeah, not at all. What I care about is this is a man who was caught cheating during the Iowa primary, caught red-handed, and it blew up so spectacularly and so badly that the state chair had to resign. And this was a good man with integrity who got caught up in Pete's schemes here. And we're supposed to forget that happened. We're supposed to forget about all of his record against Black and minority folks when he was mayor, right? To me, the fact that this man is still walking around as a representative of a major party is just insane. And anyone who is taking what he says credibly should also be questioned, right? So that's just one of the names on the list. And we can go through each and every one of them, but here's the problem that I see. We don't see anyone on that list who has a clear, cogent record of consistently adhering to the Democratic Party platform. The platform. Not necessarily what I, as a progressive, wish they would do. But if you go and look at the party platform, those things that they said that they would represent and be champions of their own party, that they freely chose, no one on that list is consistent, and I would wager more than 50%. So this is the administration we're looking at when we're looking at a Biden-Harris administration, and that is deeply troubling for all of the issues that we have. So under the last 4 years, we had this huge swell of issues with xenophobia, racism, white supremacy, the Proud Boys, all of these little want-to-play army men and shoot at Americans and disregard our constitutions. So now we've got all of that on top of the issues that we still had to deal with: climate change, rent control, housing, homelessness, veterans, all of it. And this is the team that we're going to put in place, the team that is champions of status quo. That should be troubling to everybody. If you've been paying attention for the last 4 years, this should be troubling to everybody.
Absolutely. And the people that are the most excited about this new White House that's coming in are the people that are affected by those issues, right? That they're fine, everything's good, their 401k is good, and they'll be okay, right? It's the other 40 to 50% of Americans that can't afford a $400 emergency are the ones that are going to suffer because of that. It's going to be the exact same old that we always have.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I agree. And that is where my concern comes from. So I'm very happy to see that people are spreading the message and just trying to be patient on social media with our centrist right Democrats and letting them know that no, we're not going to be still. We're not going to be quiet. And we're done with that conversation. One of the things, Andy, you'll appreciate this, the deficit came up again this weekend in earnest. There were quite a number of people who started talking with grave concern about the deficit. And that wasn't really a big talking point for the last 4 years. Certainly wasn't under the last year. All of a sudden now, we get to trot out the deficit. And it was just remarkable, and to me, such a wonderful thing to see. So many people quoting Stephanie Kelton, sharing her videos, and of course, your podcast that you work on. Go ahead and make a plug for the podcast.
Macro and Cheese, making macroeconomics. It's so delish.
Right. So I will post a link to it, because anything and everything that you want to know about financing on a federal level, on a national level, how we got to where we are, how money actually works, everything from the savings and loan debacle, all the way up to how we spend our currency and invest for a better future and GDP growth. It's simplified in this podcast, so I will post a link to it. But what I saw was the pushback, right, on the deficit conversation, and people explaining, my favorite was, the deficit, who do we owe that money to?
Alpha Centauri.
And that's exactly right. So it was just, it's wonderful to see that the work that Mosler and all of these phenomenal economists have been doing for years is finally starting to take a foothold in the national conversation. Absolutely.
That's the thing. That's the one issue that you can point to that's coming back again is Biden is a politician from the Reagan era, right? When trickle-down economics reared its ugly head and started to make life horrible for the working class and the degradation of society, right? That playbook, the difference between that playbook and what should be happening now is that was written on paper, right? We're pre-electronic age, old. That's how old that is, right? The problem is now there are enough people that are starting to be aware of what's happening, how federal financing actually works, or at least get an idea of how it works. Or look at what happened during a pandemic, where the federal government gave the Federal Reserve the ability to inject $1 trillion into the stock market to keep it whole in the month of March without any detrimental effects to the economy in any way, right? So if you've got your eyes open and you're watching what's happening, you should start to be able to see that the neoclassical economic mantra of austerity, and we got to figure out how to pay for it, is bullshit, right? It exists. Why is it that the country can fund the military at $800 billion a year, but they can't pay for anything else? Why can Trump give a huge tax break to the rich and it doesn't affect the economy in any way, right? You have to start to understand that this mantra of austerity, that the same old politicians that are back in power now are starting to float, doesn't mean shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that rather than just a few voices now, it's so many voices coming out. And you can see that people have been doing their homework, have been doing their research, and are able to push back on this huge lie that has been prevalent my entire lifetime. So to your good work, Andy, and to everyone else out there who is doing the good work and sharing the videos and having a rational conversation about monetary policy, it is so critical right now. And I got to give a shout out to our boomers, because I had kind of a moment where it hit me how long our boomer activists have been shouting in the dark and no one's listening. And they are still there on the front lines fighting, like things like climate change. We know that climate change and the climate crisis that we are now starting to understand has been going on for generations. And they were the first ones out there talking about it, and we weren't listening. We were so busy trying to survive, or, trying to get a Walkman or a CD player or going to the arcade, or didn't understand it, right? And now when we look at Climate Strike and it's children who are leading the fight, I am so encouraged to see the children on the front line and our boomers behind them, encouraging them, defending them. So when it comes to monetary policy, climate, all of these things, they all are interconnected. So shout out to our older audience, our boomers. We did not appreciate you. We still don't appreciate you. And we will do better, because you have been in this fight for so long, and you already know all the tricks. You've heard it all. You already know it. And we need to listen and lean in a little bit more when you say things like, yeah, they're going to do X, Y, and Z next, prepare yourself, because you've seen it. And this is where we are right now, right? So I want to make that point that this weekend I was contemplating that while I was having conversations with some older folks who are right on the front line of LGBT, Black Lives Matter, all of these things. Thank you so much for your perseverance, because it's going to take all of us to push back on a Biden-Harris administration now. Because the way I see it, and Biden himself, he's been working on this, it is us against Republicans and centrist Democrats who aren't really centrist at all, right? That's a war on two fronts, as well as big money and media and everything that they own. So it's really going to take all of us to patiently and sometimes impatiently, with force, say, no, we're done with that. We're going to move in this direction. You're going to come with us, or we will make sure, number one, you don't get reelected. Number two, that you fall victim to your own policies. And number three, that everybody is well aware of your actions and rhetoric. So speaking of actions and rhetoric, Rahm Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago, former staffer for the Obama administration, and complete Republican centrist blue jumpsuit Democrat. He is on the transition team for Biden. And I called this out months ago, before Biden even became the presumptive nominee. Hey, you got Rahm on the team. That's a problem. Well, Rahm is probably in the middle of the road for heinous individuals to be advising the presidential-elect team on policies. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Rahm, let me tell you about Rahm a little bit. As mayor of Chicago, he practiced austerity. Chicago is not broke in any way, shape, or form. Chicago brings in a profit of $2.6 billion at least every year. So how is Chicago under an austerity program? Well, Rahm Emanuel helped accelerate something called a TIF, tax incremental financing and funding, interchangeable. What that said was a business could come in as an incentive and not pay property taxes. Their neighbors, working people, would offset and pay the tax for that company. So any overage that they got in property tax by benefiting the state didn't get paid. It got paid by working people. What that meant was it starved schools, it starved teacher pensions, it starved state programs, all of these things to bring in these businesses that were super profitable and hiring temp workers, majority of them, not employees. So there's an entire organization that is working on tracking these TIFs and showing that these are handouts and subsidies to big businesses, multinational corporations that don't necessarily need it, and how it is actually starving the working family, right? So that's Rahm Emanuel. He is also famous for closing schools, not renovating schools, but earmarking $195 million for a brand new police training academy that we didn't need in Chicago. So that's Rahm Emanuel in a nutshell. I could go on and on and on for days on Rahm Emanuel, but he's the one who is now in charge of well, he's a participant. I don't know that he's in charge of the transition. And he went out after Biden was announced as the winner of the election and started making the rounds on corporate-owned media. And he said some things that even journalists paid by the corporate media went, what the fuck, Rahm? What? So this is how they think. Right? This was completely unscripted, but it's off the cuff. And this is exactly who Rahm Emanuel is and how he thinks about people. So his entire platform is, well, you can just go ahead and get job retraining. So for those of you in the IT field who do programming, who do all of the tech work, surely it only took you 6 months to get your education so that you could be employable, right? All of that coding and expertise really means nothing. And anybody could do your job. You're just a cog in the wheel. That's what Rahm Emanuel is saying. He's basically saying, let them eat cake. This is how they segment and just diminish all of our contributions as workers just trying to get by. So my thought on this, now, Andy, you were a union electrical worker. You got your degree in what, 4 months? You were ready to go?
The industry that I worked in as an electrician in an automotive plant in Ontario, my apprenticeship was 4 years.
4 years? Well, you were just an electrician. You weren't even doing programming. How is that possible?
Yeah, I'm just an electrician. I just basically, it was my job to round up the electrons.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Put them in a bag.
That's
Put
right.
all of them in a bag.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so this particular comment, and there were many during this interview, but this is the one that was just most telling about the mindset of these people, right? So just because that someone has this kind of access doesn't necessarily mean that they've got a good grasp on the conditions for average Americans, right? So here we see clearly he hasn't got a clue what's going on. And with all these retail jobs and everything else, they're just, eat cake. Well, we also cut funding for job transfers and things like that. And remember, this is the same party leadership that says the Green New Deal is aspirational, right? That we shouldn't be pursuing job training for people who need it in industries that are sustainable and do not add to our collective death. That's what you have in charge. So if this doesn't get you motivated, but wait, there's more. So we're painting a picture here of what is coming based on what we've seen, what we know, and what they are saying, right? So this next one here, Andy, you want to put that one up? This is Time Magazine. I thought this one was pretty telling too. Now, this was written 5 days ago, 4 days when I pulled it, but I thought it was really telling because African Americans, we owe them such a debt. And some of the people on Biden's prospective cabinet list owe the black vote for their election at all. So we saw it in Alabama, we saw it in Missouri, we saw it in Georgia, we saw it in North Carolina, Chicago. It is always the black vote that puts these people into positions of power. And what do? Nothing. Nothing. Due process, equal protection? No. Especially when you put a ticket together of Biden and Harris. You sent a message that the status quo is still going to be in place. However, it was the black vote, the very people whose lives are being threatened just by their very existence, walking outside, barbecue, selling water, all of these things. They delivered for you. It is time to pay the debt. And I keep going back to, I forget the activist's name, but the woman who said, you are lucky that what we are asking for is equality and not revenge.
That would be Kimberly Jones.
Kimberly Jones, thank you very much. And she wrote a wonderful book on this subject. And I think that she is right. Because if you look back at our history and everything that's going on, even just the last few years, even in places like Portland and Seattle and Chicago, where you had white supremacists coming into those cities, disrupting, shooting at people, and blaming it on gangs and things like that, we know clearly who was at fault. We owe a debt that must be paid. And everything in Biden's history, his political history, his policy must change. There is no excuse, no status quo, nothing that can excuse it. We have to move forward and we have to put in these protections. The Voting Rights Act, all of these pieces for equality have to happen, and they have to happen in the first 100 days. If they don't.
Absolutely. It's because that's the key, right? And that's why a lot of people that said that right now is not a good time for the Democrats to win this election because of the narrative of what they were saying. And their only policy position was bad, orange man bad, right? Like, I mean, okay, that's fine, right? And I think we can all agree that Donald Trump was a vile human being, right? And the fact that he's gone is a good thing. Okay, that's fine, right? But if that's your only policy position, okay, how do you show people that you're not Trump, right? How do you do that? How can you start to make positive changes to show why Trump was bad and you're good, right? And when you look at it, you see that the normal neoliberal response to problems in the United States is not going to cut it. It's not going to make a difference in anybody's life below the 1%. And that's the problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I want to get to some of the comments. So I appreciate everybody weighing in this morning. You are way snarky this morning, and I so appreciate it. Totally here for it. So Mike wanted to comment on Rahm Emanuel and says he sounds like a 12-year-old on Xbox chat. L2 code noob. So I thought that was hilarious. And then Dave Katowski, our newest patron member. Hi, Dave. Good morning. He says, if y'all have worked with anybody without experience who knows how difficult it is to train up that individual, there's a productivity hit with working with inexperienced folks. He's absolutely right. From a management perspective, the attrition rate is a category that costs a business. And then the training rate is part of that. When you're training somebody, especially with no experience or very little experience, you have to add at least 6 months for that person to ramp up and reduce the productivity of the person who is training them. So these are known costs, and he's absolutely right. And apparently Rahm Emanuel doesn't understand basic business practices. So, yeah.
Well, Rob, it sounds like you're almost advocating for a job guarantee. Right. So
yes.
If you are, well, here you go. I've got the perfect person to talk to. Her name is Professor Pavlina Cherneva. She wrote a wonderful book called The Right to a Job. Right? And it would get everybody back to work on a absolutely wonderful way, back in their communities, rebuilding, green new energy, all of these wonderful things. So, coding, sure, whatever, but I think that this is a better way to do it. And I think that we should push for that. And I think that Rahm should be the spokesperson for it.
Well, if he takes some time to do some training and maybe 6 months, maybe that 6 months training, he can get it done too. So we invite him to do that. And then some more comments here. Medicare for all will go a long way if you want to pay for that vote. And actually, I think my personal belief is talking to neighbors. So when I was doing face-to-face before COVID, face-to-face small group presentations on this, every time I was winning over an entire room. And this was a room of Tea Party people. Once they heard it explained and I gave them the citation sources and I gave them the data, I am not being paid, here it is. And they really understood it. They were doing it. And we see that reflected. All of this work that is being done right now where people are exploring the information and going to conferences and things like this where Medicare for All is truly being explained, that was reflected in two different places. Number one, Fox News talked about their own viewers, the majority of their own viewers who now favor a Medicare for All universal health care program. If it's good enough for your congressperson, it should be good enough for you, right? If it's good enough for your state representative, it's good enough for you.
That's what makes it universal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what happens if you're on the same universal plan as your congressman? Is Louis Gohmert, Mitch McConnell, are they going to cut their benefits? No. Which means yours get preserved too. You're tied together. You are now chained to Mitch McConnell. He is not going to hurt himself to screw you. It's just not going to happen. So I thought that was a very telling metric. And then in the chat here, somebody brought up that, that was Dave. Almost every candidate, and this is for House and Senate, almost every candidate that supported progressive policies got reelection or got elected. So one race in Illinois, just because my candidate ran against her, Lauren Underwood, almost, she is just now turning the corner. She almost lost to Jim Oberweis, a multimillionaire dairy ice cream guy. She almost lost because she herself came from a healthcare administrator's perspective. She was one of those people with a clipboard. She liked to pretend that she was a nurse. She was trained as a nurse, never worked as a nurse. She was one of the administrators who was like, not necessary. right? So she was not an advocate for Medicare for all at all. In fact, she is famous for throwing out a mom and her child for even mentioning Medicare for all, threw her out of her office. So she had actually gone towards the Republican side towards the end of her election, catering to Republicans. I don't know who was advising her or who was telling her that this was a good idea. I'm assuming it was a ramped up version of what they were telling Biden. Reach out to the right, be a Republican, all of it. She, this close. And I think there were enough mail-in ballots of we're talking anywhere from 200 to 400 votes that just put her over the top. So it was a hair's breadth. And I fully expect to see lawyers get involved for a recount for Jim Oberweis. So that race still isn't quite decided yet. But I think if you're going to run for office, or anybody who is considering running for office or works for somebody who wants to run, look at the Lauren Underwood race, that's Illinois 14, as a what not to do, right? So they're going to choose a Republican over a Republican light any day. Absolutely.
Of course they are. That's why it never works, right? And just on a quick side note, that dairy billionaire guy that you were talking about, those guys really bug me, because not only am I neoliberal intolerant, I'm also lactose intolerant.
There you go. Yeah, and what was it? Mike just posted in the chat that Oberweis's his nickname is Old Milk Guy, so which is kind of true.
I guess you could call him a sourpuss.
Yes, very good. So
somebody should check his expiry date.
That's exactly right. So the last example that I want to highlight this morning, I saw this morning. It was posted, I think, last night by a person out of Chicago, and it was just so telling of the shut up and sit down, and Biden's in place, so you better fall in line. So it's kind of lengthy and kind of batshit crazy, but I think it really works here. So let's see. Yeah, there it is. So this was a comment where this particular person was saying nobody minded Biden during the time that he ran for office previously, and nobody had anything to say about him while he was vice president. Therefore, you have no voice now. And so when I first saw this, my thought was, this person has a problem with object impermanence. Is this someone who, when they leave a room, the objects in that prior room don't exist for them anymore? The
Right.
people in places just don't exist until they walk into a room. Because I remember, and we can go back and see the record of the number of times that Biden tried to run for office and lost, the number of times that Biden had to withdraw from a race because of his own gaps, and the number of times that we marched and pushed back and said, Joe, this is not okay. The number of times he stood with Klan leaders and said, very fine people. The number of times we push back on that. So this to me is someone who obviously is either very young or very inexperienced or newly woke, or maybe being paid. I don't know. But this to me was an example of the messaging that you have seen and will continue to see under the Biden administration to keep you in line. And just take it all in, memorize it, understand it, and put it aside. So you're an adult, your life matters, your kids, your family, your friends, all of it. It all matters, and you get a say. And people like this do not get to shut you down. If we weren't going to take it during white supremacists and fascists, we're certainly not going to take it under neoliberals either, because so much is at stake and we are running out of time.
Yes, we are. We are absolutely running out of time. We don't have the what did they say? It was 12 years of 2.5 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's-
So we're down to 9 years, maybe 8 years of meaningful work to offset the climate crisis, which is quite literally an extinction level event. And we're working on a story right now about a charity, a gentleman who is a veteran who is doing this amazing work where his charity and the work that they do intersects in 3 different spaces. Veterans with PTSD for long-term sustainable support, homelessness, and the climate crisis. Because in doing all the research and things for this particular story, the U.S. alone, with our houses and the way that they build our houses, contributes to our global footprint of 30% of the carbon in the atmosphere. So as a country, we are taking up so much space, so much of that carbon that is in the atmosphere. The US and Canada, by the way, we're some of the 2 biggest polluters in it, and a large portion of that isn't just in the fuels that we use, but it's in how we build our houses. So this particular story, and the charity is called Veterans Off Grid, and I will post a link to it. It is a verified nonprofit. You can help them. But we want to help tell this story and do it in a credible, meaningful way. But what we're doing right here in the U.S., and this is one example where we are stalling the rest of the world. And by all estimates, by 2050, we'll have like 30 million climate refugees. Where do you think they're going to go? Right? And this is south of our border, north of our border, in our country, state that I live in. Is it going to be livable in 20, 30 years? Nevada's hardly livable now. So what are we going to do? And all of these things matter. And for them to keep kicking the can down the road with the Green New Deal, federal jobs guarantee, all of these issues, it's going to come down on us.
Right, and exactly. And if you think that the only thing that we have to worry about is forest fires and tornadoes and hurricanes, think again. As regions of the earth that were habitable by species on the planet get smaller, that means that human beings and other species live closer together. And a lot in the scientific community believe that is the reason why we've had a COVID happen, right? And that these type of pandemics that have happened are going to be more frequent as these regions decrease in size, right? And that's scary as hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've talked about, these superbugs as the permafrost melts and all of these things, viruses and germs that we have not seen on this planet for thousands of years that no one has any immunity to. Wipe us out. So this is a serious issue, and all of these things supersede the status quo and the prestige and this idea that your title and your job that you've been elected to means that you matter more than the rest of us. All of that's done. We're done with that now. We're done with these austerity conversations. All of it has been laid bare, and for that, I thank Trump and his inept administration for really pulling the veil down and making it so that we understand very clearly that all of it is bullshit. We've been lied to, and we have a very narrow path forward right now that does not allow for fall in line, sit down, be quiet. Now is not the time.
Performative type politics.
That's exactly right. Exactly. Yeah. The bill has come due, and you better deliver.
That's right. That's right. We have to understand that this fight to get back in the game it has to continue at least as strong as it was against Trump. Right?
Oh.
Because we've lost an entire portion of the population that were just in the fight to get rid of Trump so that they could get back to the regular normal. Right? It's up to the progressive side to continue that fight, to wake people up and say, this is so important now, that this is not a time to sit on your hands and go to brunch, as they say. This is where the fight continues. This is where the Black Lives Matter and the progressives and everybody else needs to keep the pressure on the center-right regime that's taking power back again and say, no, we're not doing this. We're not going there. We're going to fight you like hell and get ready for it.
Well said, Andy. And I think you've encapsulated this particular episode very well. So I'm done. I'm done for now. So yeah. So tomorrow is Veterans Day, and for those of you who didn't know it, I didn't know it. My husband explained it to me. It was originally Armistice Day. So on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, the guns went silent. World War I. So that is why we celebrate it on November 11th. And it has morphed into Veterans Day for us here in the United States, but this was the original intent. So Memorial Day is for our fallen soldiers and to remember them. Veterans Day is supposed to be about remembering what happened in previous conflicts, having better judgment now, which we don't, and keeping our promise to our veterans, those that we have asked to serve, those who have been forced into service through economic conscription, making sure that we take care of them and keep the promise for them giving up their freedoms and their lives during their service and sometimes loss of life for us, for our benefit, and for those things that we say we need to keep secure. So please, so I would ask you, rather than thinking of vets, which is so easy to do and largely performative, I'm going to post the link to Veterans Off Grid, and I cannot stress enough how even $1 will make a difference that will benefit your life directly soon. So, I plan to post quite a number of things for this particular charity, and then when we get this mini documentary together, actually having a broader conversation, because there's so much going on with this particular charity and how it affects all of these intersectional groups. It's just mind-blowing. So look for that. So, Andy, any closing thoughts? Get us out of here?
Well, just, along the same lines. Canada is Remembrance Day on the 11th, the same idea, right? We have to remember the sacrifice that the Canadian soldiers made, right? But we also have to learn from the lessons from that, and the reason why people on the left can come to an understanding of that these regime change wars that happen all over the world have to come to an end. You can support the people that are forced to go to war by the regime without actually supporting war. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's all I got.
Well said, Andy. You've just been on fire this morning. Good job.
Well,
good job.
Must be the red shirt.
Nice. All right, well, that's it. And we'll see you back here on a Wednesday. We're working on a guest for Wednesday, but we'll see how that goes. I know people are busy working. So, yeah, if you have anything you want us to cover, do some research, have a conversation about it, drop us an email, send us something on our Facebook page, on our Twitter. Any of those will work. So thank you.
Take care, everyone.
We bout that A, we in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keep it G. What?